Welcome to this Heritage Talk on Hidden Nature, What's Beneath Your Feet. This talk is in partnership with Museums Sheffield. So I will introduce our speakers. So I'm joined by two of my colleagues from Wessex Archaeology, Fiona and Jenny, and then I'm joined from Martha, who is the Curator of Archaeology at Sheffield Museums. So to begin with, we are going to look at environmental archaeology. So Fiona is going to reveal all.
Hi, so like Natasha said, I'm Fiona and I work in the environmental team at Wessex and I'm based up in Sheffield as well. And I just wanted to talk to you today a bit about kind of it's a bit more hidden the environmental side of archaeology. So when you're excavating a site, you're not just finding things like pottery, metal, bones, you can also find evidence of what the environment was like around people when they were living in the past and how they may have used it. And this is from kind of charred plant remains and things like charcoal that we find in the soil. So what we do on site is you saw the buckets earlier, we take samples from things like ditches and pits, maybe if we think we've got like a hearth from a fire or floor layers, we take samples from them, pop them into those buckets during excavation, and then they come back to us for a process called floatation, which removes the environmental information that we want from kind of the soil. It's essentially cleaning the soil. And I've got a video here, if Natasha's ready, of my colleague Jenny showing exactly how that process works.
Yeah.
And just mix this up slightly. This is quite a charcoal rich sample, so it's going to get a bit noisy in a minute. I'm just trying to break up any excess soil that the peroxide didn't break down. It seems to have done a great job. Okay, I'm going to put the pump on now, so it's going to get a little noisy. So they'll bring the water up. So I'm opening the valve, which opens it from here. So what basically is happening is that all the lighter environmental material should float to the top and go into, and we'll catch it here, and this is what we call the flot. Sometimes it's not very helpful and it won't always float by itself, so we need to help it a bit. Yeah, see, this is very charcoal rich, and this is what we call the flot, the stuff that floats. And this is the stuff that we're interested in. I mean, this is obviously charcoal, but like some of the smaller stuff may contain like charred grain, charred seeds, anything like that. It's not something that we can necessarily see with the eye right now, but it's certainly something that we'll be able to identify later. What's left in this tank is the larger stuff like stones and any artefacts like bone, pottery, flint tools, anything like this, and that will get saved as well, and that will go to the our artefact specialist, whereas this stuff will stay here and go to the environmental specialists. That's brilliant, Mum. Okay. Turn this off.
Hi, so as you saw there, that was my colleague Jenny just explaining what we do in what's called the flotation tank with getting all the environmental material that we look at out of the soil, essentially, yeah, cleaning the soil. So what happens next is we look at, as you can see here, there's a photo of what we call the flot that Jenny was talking about, and this one looks to be quite charcoaly. So we let that dry out, and then because of how small it is, we actually tend to need a microscope to look into it. So charcoal is a lot bigger, and you can tend to be able to see it with the naked eye. But then for things such as the seeds and the grain, we look under a microscope to start identifying, to get some idea of what environment we've got going on there. But it's not just charred plant remains we find. We actually find things like snails as well, which can tell us various things on top of everything else. So that's a picture I've got there of some charcoal that we have. And that from that we can look at the species, and then this is my lovely microscope that I use to pull out various bits of environmental information that we need. So through identifying the charred plant remains, we can tell what the land use was. So for example, we've got a picture here with various grains and seeds that can give us an idea. The land use, it could be whether it's agricultural, whether it's been kind of just left almost as wasteland. Sometimes it can tell us if processing, so if like a farm is there, or actually if it's just a storage area, it can give us a heck of a lot of information on things like that. And then certain species of weed seeds we find can tell us if habitats are dry or if they're cold, if they're wet. So again, that can give us an idea of how the land use and the whole environment has changed throughout history, and kind of give us this snapshot of when what we're excavating, what it was like when people were living there. So while environmental archaeology is incredibly important to determine land use along with the structures and the artifacts that are found, it can also answer questions about the surrounding environment, and in turn it will also tell us why people might have lived there and just add that extra thing. I always say to people, you imagine kind of a reconstruction of a building that someone might have excavated. You may have seen on something like Time Team, and you get the kind of the white behind it, but the environmental fills in the trees and the shrubs, and maybe if there's some water nearby or a slightly swampier area, we can help to inform on that with the environmental materials. We also do find artifacts in the flot that we might not be able to see by the naked eye, which can be pretty interesting as well, although not my specialization. It can be quite nice. We find things like small bits of glass. You can find beads, tiny little animal bones, which Jenny will expand on later. And it just gives us, it just fills out the picture and just gives us a really, really good idea of what land use has been in the past. For instance, I'm just trying to think, for example, I have found beads in the past. I think there is an image somewhere that we've got, and yeah, as I say, it just adds to the whole filling of the picture. So the image we've got in front of you right now is a combination of, there is some grains and some weeds in it. And there's a tiny little kind of circular weed near the bottom, and it's a type of weed seed that's really common in agriculture. So depending on quantities, it may inform us that there has been some sort of growth of crops, whatever they may be, that people are using and manipulating the land around them, and therefore that's why structures may appear. So it's a very important part of archaeology that's quite often hidden because it's that small and you need microscope to see it rather than the naked eye. Okay, so this is another one similar to the last one, but a lot more of it. This was quite a nice sample. So there's a lot of what we call weed seeds in here, is predominantly, and it was from a layer from a site that was below a garden, so it had a lot of stuff that was quite interesting and a good mix of different plants, and gave us a really good idea of what the land use was. They're not always this rich, but it is particularly nice when you get one this rich, although slightly overwhelming at times when there's so many seeds.
It looks like it's in chocolate or something. Oh, this is a lovely photo.
So this sample, this is a snail shell. So you might notice in the background it's wet, this. So we do actually get samples sometimes that they've been waterlogged for so long, if we were to dry them out, it would actually damage what there is inside the sample, and it gives amazing preservation. So as you can see, this shell, I'm not sure how old it was, but yeah, it's incredibly old, but still it could have been left there yesterday almost. One really good example of waterlogging was some we found at Sheffield Castle, which had some beautiful hazelnuts and things like that, but they've been amazingly preserved because of that waterlogging, and so they're always really nice samples that we get to look at when we get them.
So will they be continued to be stored in water?
Yes, we always keep them in water, so when they do end up at the museum, they will continue to be in a jar, sealed, so no air can get into them, and then just to keep that preservation.
So the environmental samples go to the museum as well?
Yes, so at the end of a site, when we're sending things to the museum, it's not just the finds that go. We send all the flot, so the bit that's floated at the top, we send that as well, because sometimes it does make it a display, but it's also, if anyone ever wants to investigate it further down, there's that complete archive for them from the site. So here we've got a bead, just to give you an idea of how tiny, when we do find artifacts, they are absolutely tiny. So this is again taken down the microscope, and without having seen this under the microscope, I don't think there's any chance that it would have been caught and kept to one side to be looked at by one of our artifact experts. So yeah, it's some of the things we find are absolutely tiny.
Wow. Do you know what this bead is made of? Am I putting you on the spot there?
I'm not 100% sure. I've passed it on, and I'm waiting. It's quite a recent one, so I'm waiting to find out. But it's a beautiful colour.
So what have we got here?
So this is a small piece of blue glass. The site it came from did actually have some larger pieces as well, but it's always worthwhile. We always pull out what we can and let the find specialist decide, what they want to look at and whether it's helpful to them. So it's much better to get everything out. But yes, it's a very small bit of blue glass, which
Okay.
stuck
So
out
this
quite a
isn't
bit on the
flint.
brown. Not flint, no.
It's a beautiful colour.
It is, I absolutely love it. And this is something else we find beyond the kind of which does help with the environment, that Jenny will talk about more. So these are some small animal bones, and I think there might even be a little tooth in there as well. And again, this is taken under the microscope. So they're absolutely tiny to the naked eye, that you can see them obviously, but you just can't get the detail, and therefore the IDing that you'd get from looking at them down the microscope. And I think I've got one more photo of like how tiny they can be. And this is a pelvis of, no, not a pelvis. It's a vertebrae. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting my brain confused. Yeah, it's a vertebrae up towards the neck of a very small animal. As you can see, there's a pebble, a tiny little pebble next to it, which just shows you what we managed to pull out from these finds, from these samples, and just how important environmental archaeology can be, and just not as well known as some of the other aspects of a site.
Thank you for watching part 1 of this heritage talk on hidden nature, what's beneath your feet.